Again, I want to welcome you and thank you for being a part of this tonight. We are going to give you a current events update. I shared with you, many of you were here on Sunday when we talked about this the first time, that there was a terrible, tragic terrorist attack. But it wasn't an attack, it was a series of attacks. This started late Friday night our time, early Saturday morning Israel time. So we gave you an update, some news items on Sunday, and we looked at this from a spiritual perspective, and we're going to do that again tonight. I'll start with some of the news for you. I have written for the Jerusalem Post for a long time over the years, and so I know a lot of these folks, and they're part of the story that I'm going to tell you tonight, because I said this to you on Sunday. This is personal. This is personal for a lot of folks in this room. This is personal for me, for Bretta. This is very personal for our family. So the types of attacks are from the most sophisticated to the most simplistic. And when we talk about the terrorist attacks themselves, we are really limited by the trouble of the human language, because there are not words severe enough for me to tell you some of the things that have happened. You probably know, we'll give you some stats in a few minutes about the numbers of people who were killed, the numbers of people who were wounded, the numbers of people who were taken hostage, and the heartache of the people who have lost their loved ones is enormous. But it's an even higher order of magnitude of those who have their loved ones who are being held hostage right now. Now, there's going to be some good news I'll get to share with you. And sometimes it's good news with an exclamation mark. And sometimes it's good news with a question mark, because we're not really sure. We hope it's good news. This next slide says that Hamas claims to have released a female hostage with her 2 children. And there's a grainy photograph of a woman in the wilderness with small children. Now, I should say at the outset that when the headline starts with Hamas claims, that really means nothing. Okay? But maybe there's some good news. This is the good news with a question mark. Maybe there's a woman who was a hostage that has been released. Times of Israel, I've written for them over the years as well, and this says residents across the north are told to shelter as several aircraft appear to infiltrate Israel. Now, you need to learn your maps, and we'll show them to you tonight, but that's a different terrorist group in the north. That's a different crisis if there's really attacks from the north. The state of Israel has a different governmental system, and we can talk politics and Israeli politics another day, but they have a parliamentary system. And you have a prime minister who's the leader of the ruling coalition, and then you have an opposition group of parties. Well, the leaders of the various parties have chosen to form what's called an emergency national unity government. And that's good news, because Israel has lots and lots of internal political debates right now. But when you are talking about life and death, when you're talking about the slaughtering of innocent lives, you put politics and legal debates behind. And the next slide shows you that's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the center there with the tie. That's Yoav Gallant on his right, your left in the all black. That's the Minister of Defense. That's Benny Gantz on the far right of this photograph. He's in the opposition party, but they're forming this national unity government. And look at the headline: going on the offensive, Israel vows to wipe Hamas from the face of the earth. Now this is a worldwide problem. It's a worldwide crisis. It's a crisis for America. Our State Department has confirmed the deaths of at least 22 Americans in this attack. That's what the next headline says. And many Israelis have dual citizenship. Many of the friends that you've met that I bring here to our church were born in America and they moved to Israel, and they're dual citizens. So we don't have the identities of these 22, so we don't know how many are solely American citizens or they're dual Israeli and American citizens. But either way, they're Americans, and the State Department has confirmed at least 22 Americans were killed in this attack. I told you on Sunday that Israel was facing a two-front war from the south and from the north, but that's not true any longer. They're now facing a three-front war from Gaza, from Lebanon, and from Syria. We'll put a couple of maps up for you. We're zoomed out on the left, zoomed in on the right. Look at on the right map, the bottom left, and you're going to get a lot of maps tonight. It says Gaza, okay? And that arrow shows you one area of attack. Due north, it's the vertical blue arrow. That's out of the country of Lebanon. That's a different terrorist group called Hezbollah. And then just to its right, just to the northeast, right where it says Golan, that's in the country of Syria. There's attacks being perpetrated on the northeast part of the country. So Israel is now set to face a three-front war. And here's another news story that I want you to know about. Look at the headline. It says, Israel directs public hospital to not treat Hamas terrorists. And if you read that, you probably think, well, that's the most obvious thing in the world. But it's not, and let me tell you why. Because the way Israelis who have suffered through terrorist attacks since before the state was even founded 75 years ago, their official policy is to follow medical protocols. And medical protocols say you treat the most seriously wounded person first, which means, think of this, it's the policy of the paramedics and the doctors and the EMTs of Israel for its 75-year history that when they come upon the scene of a terrorist attack, they provide medical attention to the most injured person first. Well, guess who that often is? The suicide bomber who blew himself up, or the attacker who came to shoot up the restaurant or stab people in the bus station. So the paramedics would arrive, they would evaluate who's the most injured and give medical care to that person, even if they know it was the terrorist himself. Well, the government has made a directive to the hospitals that you're not going to do that right now. You're going to treat the victims first and not the terrorists. We asked on Sunday how many casualties were there. And at the time, I told you there were at least 600 wounded. Well, that's doubled. It's now at least killed. At least 600 killed, I told you on Sunday. Now it's at least 1,200 killed, including, as of now, 189 IDF soldiers. And I told you on Sunday there were at least 2,000 wounded. Now it's 3,200 wounded. And remember what we learned on Sunday, and you're going to hear this a lot over the next few weeks. In a country of 9 million people, those are enormous numbers. And if you extrapolate that to the population of the United States with 340 million people, proportionally, that's as if 44,000 people were killed on one day in America. And 120,000 were wounded in one day. in a tiny, tiny place. Israel is smaller than you will ever believe. Texas is 32 times larger than Israel. Israel fits inside of Lake Michigan. It's a tiny place. And it's an enormous number of people who were killed. And this was perpetrated first and foremost by a terrorist organization known as Hamas. And I shared with you on Sunday that this is a Sunni Muslim terrorist group. It was founded in 1987 for the whole purpose of exterminating the world of Jews. And it's a terrorist group. It's Sunni Muslims. And see, one of the things that it's a struggle with these presentations is I could teach you for an hour on every one of these subjects. So trying to give you an overview. But understand, this is a Sunni Muslim group who's wholly owned and funded by Iran, which is Shiite Muslims. And the Sunni Muslims hate the Shiite Muslims. They hate each other, except when it comes to the partnership that they have to kill Jews. So it is wholly owned and funded by Iran. There's a lot of debate in the media and in the government of various countries about whether Iran was directly involved. I have no elective office and no governmental position. I'll just go ahead and answer the question for them. The answer is yes. Iran is 100% behind this. And as the map I showed you on Sunday, look where Iran is. It doesn't share a border with Israel. This is not a conflict over a border or over water rights or anything except evil incarnate. So when you think about Iran and you think that it is the owner and operator of Hamas, because Iran doesn't fight battles. Iran pays other people to do their murders. So Hamas is the organization in the Gaza Strip. And this is an article that was published yesterday in the foreword. And it's about reading the charter of Hamas, because it presents itself as a political movement, a political party. And so it has founding documents. And the founding documents don't hide anything. The next slide shows you in the middle of the page. The first version of the charter, adopted in 1988, begins with a preamble. It reads, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. And then it has 36 articles, clauses. How are we going to carry out our vision of murdering as many Jews as possible? And the next slide in this article is a summary. And this was excellent writing. The last paragraph says, in the 2014 essay, Jeffrey Goldberg called the Hamas Charter a frank and open call for genocide. And then, if you skip down a bit, Goldberg titled the essay, What Would Hamas Do If It Could Do Whatever It Wanted? And as this author says, now we know the answer. Because when I share with you some of the evil, I can't share with you all of the evil. If I share with you some of the evil, now we know the answer. What would Hamas do if it could do whatever it wanted? Now, to orient you on the map, we've showed you where the Gaza Strip is in the southwest of the country. And it's sort of like a rectangle. It's in the white shaded area on this map. And then you see that brown shaded area all around it. That's what you call Israel proper. And that brown shaded area is collectively called the Gaza envelope. It is territory that surrounds the Gaza Strip, basically extending out about 4 miles from the border fence that Israel created. As you see on the screen, populated by 70,000 Israeli citizens in the Gaza envelope. And the next slide shows you what every Israeli who lives in the Gaza envelope, and every Israeli everywhere, has pinned up to their refrigerator. This is how long you have after the alarm sounds to get to your safe room. Some towns you have 30 seconds or 45 seconds or 60 seconds. It gets longer as you get further away, and that's what the graded and shaded areas are. There are some places where you don't even have a time. So every Israeli knows if the alarm sounds from announcing an attack from Gaza, we have 30 seconds to get to our bomb shelter. We have 45 or 60 seconds to get there. Many of you have heard the term kibbutz this week, and I've been asked a lot about what is a kibbutz. A kibbutz is a specific type of village in Israel, and it was founded starting in 1910, which is obviously before the state of Israel was founded in 1948, and it's very foreign to all of us Texans who believe in, every man for himself and wide open spaces. It's totally different than what we're familiar with. It is a communal aspect. It was really started by a bunch of socialists out of Europe who moved there, socialist Jews who wanted to live in the land of the Jews in Israel. And it started as a socialist movement, and everybody lived in the same village together, and you agreed on the values, and it's democracy at its finest. And they're very small towns. You may have 500 people in your town, and if you want to become a member of the kibbutz, you have to apply and get accepted, and they don't want you to come if you're not going to share their values. And it's becoming more capitalist over the years because the world is. But it started as very socialist. Everybody worked, and everybody, whatever money they made, went into the community fund, and everybody got their basically allowance out of it. And you worked milking the cows, and you worked cooking in the dining hall, and you worked with the tractor in the field, and you worked in the children's daycare center, and you were the fireman of the group, and everybody worked, and everybody got the same payment, and it was shared life. And it was basically started as an agricultural movement. Now, it's become more capitalist, and the world's changed in 100 years. But the idea of a kibbutz is all about community feel. And now, after 100 years, it's become multi-generational. That grandparents live down the road from the children and grandchildren. And so that is what a kibbutz is. It's a specific kind of town in Israel. And the reason I think you've heard that term so much on the news is because look on this map that says kibbutzim near Gaza. All of these red dots are kibbutz. Now, the plural is kibbutzim. Every one of those is a kibbutz. And look, there are many of them located right on the border with Gaza in that so-called Gaza envelope. So, by virtue of geography, they were the most severely attacked because of right where they are, right outside the border fence. One of them is a kibbutz called Nirim, and we'll show you where this is on the map. See, in 2021 had a population of 407 people. I was in Nirim in December, just a few months ago, and here is a news story about the terrorist attack in kibbutz Nirim. Now, these are Jews from Britain who moved there, and so they talk like Brits. And this is a news story about a mother of an 11-day-old baby boy who calls her mother on the phone and says, "Mom, the terrorists have broken into the house." And what happened in this incident, as it happened in many places, is the family went into their safe room and locked the door. And the terrorists come in and try to break the door down and shoot the door open, and they can't. So they just set the house on fire and leave. Here's another kibbutz called Kfar Azah. See the star on the map. One of my personal friends lives in Kfar Azah, and I've been to his home there. Look at the headline, "The View from Kfar Azah, where Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas terrorists." So moving on, this is my friend. His name is Ralph. That's his house. That's where I visited him. And this is a photo I took. And guess what I'm looking through? The border fence, that's Gaza. Same thing, that's Gaza. Now, Ralph has lived in this town for like 30 years. Long before Israel evacuated all the Jews and gave it to the Palestinians to run, and before it became a terrorist camp. There was no fence. He said we would go to Gaza City for dinner, and there's a beach on the Mediterranean, and they were our neighbors. So I visited him in his house. This was back in 2016. And look at the headline about Kfar Azah. At least 40 babies, some beheaded, found by Israel soldiers in Hamas-attacked village. And that's in the town where my friend lives, and his kids live, and his grandkids live. That's the Fox News story. The next slide is the CNN story. Children found butchered in Israeli kibbutz. Today, our president, Joe Biden, had a meeting with Jewish leaders in America, and he confirmed these reports that Hamas beheaded Israeli children. And if you'll go back to a photo of Ralph standing in front of his house, please, I'm going to read to you what he texted me yesterday. He titled it "Hell on Earth." 6:30 a.m. Saturday morning started with a not uncommon severe barrage of rockets. Now, don't miss what he just said. I thought it was just another rocket attack, like we have all the time. At the same time, hundreds of heavily armed terrorists broke through the border and attacked numerous civilian communities. After 36 hours, there are 700 dead and more than 1,000 wounded in Israel. Of course, we know that's gone up. Most of the civilians, men, women, and children, barricaded themselves in their bomb shelters. The terrorists went door to door and murdered and took hostages back to Gaza, including whole families with children. We saw them running outside our house, dressed in black, shooting nonstop. In my small kibbutz, there were tens of dead and abducted. Our emergency response volunteers, which are members of the community that take guard shifts. Our emergency response volunteers were nearly all murdered, abducted, or wounded. Many homes were occupied and families held hostage. A good friend's daughter, husband, and baby were murdered in front of their two older children who hid in the cupboard, he wrote, and called their grandmother who was overseas. The only way to give support to the two kids was for a social worker to be on the line with them for many hours, the phone, as they were in the room with the bodies of their family until the army managed to get to them. No ambulances could get through. Those that tried, the paramedics were killed, and the ambulances were hijacked to Gaza. My daughter, who lives on a different part of the kibbutz, was without electricity for almost 18 hours. Her cell phone battery ran out, so we had no contact with her for 12 hours, fearing for her life. She was eventually extracted by the army and is now safe. My son and family, again in another area of the kibbutz, was finally extracted by the army and taken to safety as well after almost 24 hours of hell. We were in our bomb shelter all the time, surrounded by constant shooting and explosions, very bad internet connection, no phone reception, and some without electricity for 18 hours. Eventually, Army units entered all the homes to extract the families and kill the terrorists. With me, they broke into the house through a window. A great moment of fear when you don't know if they are soldiers or terrorists breaking into your house. They collected us in small groups and under heavy guard led us to buses, which eventually evacuated us out of the war zone. There was constant heavy fire around us, and we had to take cover in a bunker for a while. On the way to the buses, we passed tens of burned out vehicles, bodies lying in the streets, RPG launchers, AK-47 rifles, grenades, etc. He says where he is now, which I'm not going to say, but he's in a different location right now. He says, my wife, son, daughter, and 3 grandchildren all managed to get out alive, which is unbelievable. Most were not that fortunate. There are still pockets of terrorists in the area, and the kibbutz is deserted. We can't even bury our dead. Babies beheaded. Which is why this is a powerful tweet. Some of you have seen the work of Trey Yingst on Fox News, and look what he tweeted. Imagine the worst things possible that can be done to humans. Hamas did all of that and more to Israeli civilians. Babies beheaded, people burned alive in their homes, women raped and dragged through the streets. And he writes, don't look away. So guess what happened in the United Nations? The United Nations Human Rights Council holds a moment of silence for the loss of life in Palestinian territory. Nothing about Israelis who were killed, but they held a moment of silence for the Palestinian lives. Another big question many of you are asking about my friends, how are Israelis reacting in this? Here's a New York Post story about a woman. I do not know her. Her name is Inbar Lieberman. She's the security coordinator of her kibbutz. And it says she saved an entire kibbutz from harm by leading a group of residents to kill more than 24 advancing terrorists, including 5 she slaughtered herself. When the terrorists launched their attack, she realized the sounds were different than those heard during the usual rocket attacks on the kibbutz. She rushed to open the armory, distributed guns to the 12-member security team, coordinated their decisive response. This is a 25-year-old woman. She placed her squad of kibbutzniks, that's what you call a resident, in strategic positions across the settlement, set up ambushes that caught the gunmen off guard and turned the tables on them during their mission to inflict mass casualties. Next slide, she killed 5 terrorists herself, while the others gunned down over 20 more over the 4 hours as they turned Nir Am, her kibbutz, into an impenetrable fortress, while nearby kibbutzim suffered heavy losses. And look at the bottom paragraph. When it's all over, this woman will receive the Israel Prize. It's kind of like the Medal of Honor. The story of her heroism is a story that will go down in Israeli lore for generations. This woman, Inbal, is the reason there is one kibbutz in the entire surrounding area that remains unharmed. Here's another, this is a Jerusalem Post story about another woman, an IDF reservist. See the middle paragraph? She did not wait to be called up. She dropped her plans for the day and was at the base ready within a half hour of seeing messages about the attack. Many of you have asked about my friends. Here are 2 of my friends that some of you have met with me in Israel. They've both been to our church. These are 2 rabbi friends of mine. On the left is Jeremy Gimpel. his farm that he has built is the favorite spot for many people that have traveled to Israel with us. My oldest son, this is his favorite spot in the land of Israel. And their farm is turning into a refugee camp for all the families, not all, but many families who are fleeing from the Gaza envelope to some place to live. And so we sent money yesterday, meaning our church, meaning you sent money yesterday to them to help buy cots and blankets and food and supplies for families who are coming to live there for who knows how long. On the right side is another friend of mine, Rabbi Dov Lippman. You heard from him on Sunday. He's a former member of the parliament. And using all of his government contacts, he's coordinating foreign medical personnel to get permission to practice medicine in Israel if they come to the country, if the country needs them. Here's another news story. Two gentlemen. The guy on the left, he's just a regular citizen doing what a lot of Israelis are doing right now, and they're going to find all the soldiers, and they're just bringing them food and water bottles and everything. And this gentleman brought food to this soldier, and he says, I don't want food, I want tzitzit. And if you don't know what that is, that's the strings that come down the Orthodox Jewish men's clothing. It represents the commandments of God. He said, I don't want food, I want tzitzit. And he says, the only one I have is the one I'm wearing. So he took his off and gave it to the soldier. And the soldier said, come, let's take a picture together. And when I get back from fighting, we'll take another picture with the tzitzit that protected me. And he says, Am Yisrael Hai, which is Hebrew for the people of Israel live. Look at this. This is an airplane full of young Israelis out of the country who got on an airplane to fly home to go fight. The next slide is the airport lounge at the airport in Lima, Peru, of all places. And look at all these Israeli young people lined up to fly into the war zone to go fight. And let me tell you what's happening on that part of the story. Avi Meir is the editor of the Jerusalem Post. I know him a little bit, and look what he writes on the top. I just read an account by an El Al crew member. El Al is the national airline of Israel. An Orthodox Jewish man who preferred to remain anonymous stood quietly near the El Al counter at New York's JFK airport yesterday. Anyone who showed him an IDF call-up notice got his ticket to Israel paid for. He paid for 250 tickets. That's over $250,000. And then my friend Dov Lippman again says, are you a reservist needing to return to Israel? There's a fully paid flight departing LAX tomorrow at noon with 29 spots left for Milium Nikim, which is Hebrew for reservists. So we've got a plane ready for you if you're ready to go. I want to remind you that the IDF soldiers are real people with real families who are fighting evil, because that's what good people in moral armies do. Let me show you this. See this soldier on the right? This is an IDF reserve soldier who was called up right after the birth of his son, so he was unable to attend the Brit Milah, the circumcision ceremony of his baby boy, which you probably have learned happens on day number 8 of the baby boy's life. So this baby's 8 days old, and he couldn't be there, so they put the video so he could watch. Go back. They put the video so he could watch the ceremony on his phone. Now the next one is an Israeli soldier, a mother who gave birth 2 weeks ago. And she is now running the war room for the one unit in the army So she's a nursing mom who pumps her milk every day, and there's a military driver who takes that back to her home for her to take care of her baby, because she gave birth 2 weeks ago and now she's fighting in a war. Here's another article you heard from a friend of mine named Rabbi Pesach Walicki. He sent us a message. We heard it on Sunday morning, and that's the headline of his article. I want to read you the article. It was 8:45 a.m. and I was leading the worship in our synagogue in Bet Shemesh. Earlier in the service, an announcement was made that Israel was under attack and that air raid sirens were being sounded due to missiles being fired from Gaza all over the country, and that we should be ready. He explained the protocols for the behavior of the congregation. Prior to this announcement, no one in the congregation knew what it was happening. Because it was the 8th day festival, the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, which is also a Sabbath, nobody had their phone on or had listened to any electronic media. As the one leading the service, I read the prayer for the well-being of the Israel Defense Forces to the congregation with tears in my eyes. The mood was anything but festive. Towards the end of the service, just after I had sung the words of the liturgy quoted at the opening of this article, the Kohanim, the priests, the Jewish men who've descended from the priests, assembled in front of the synagogue to bless the congregation with the priestly blessing. At that moment, the local air raid sirens sounded. Our town of Bet Shemesh, rarely in range of the missiles from the Gaza Strip, was under fire. Multiple sirens in quick succession kept us all lying on the floor, hands on our heads for a few minutes. Finally, the formal prayer resumed. The priests returned to the front of the room and said, "May the Lord bless you and keep you, or watch over you." The opening words of the priestly blessing sounded different than usual, more relevant and more to the point. The service ended at 9:15 a.m. and everyone quickly headed home without the usual fellowship and banter after services. Upon arrival home, my son-in-law, an officer in a combat unit who together with my daughter is expecting their first child in 6 months, received a message that he was to gather his things and report for duty immediately. In moments, he was packed up and had driven off on a Shabbat festival when it is otherwise forbidden to drive our cars. My 19-year-old son, currently serving in a combat infantry unit, was home for the holiday. He received his message a few minutes later, told to pack a bag and be prepared. He told me that at some point he would need me to drive him to where the bus would take him back to his army base. We waited a few hours and then the call came. For the first time in my life, I drove my car on the Sabbath. Usually considered a grave violation of the biblical commandment to refrain from lighting any manner of fire on the Sabbath day. But for life-saving purposes, the Sabbath restrictions are superseded. While we were on the way, my son told me that the situation was far worse than anyone knew yet. Remember, we did not know the news. His messages from the army had informed him that many were killed, Israeli towns had fallen into the hands of Hamas murderers, and the Sderot, which is a village, a town, police stations had been captured. I could not believe what I was hearing. When we arrived at the Bet Shemesh train station parking lot where he would be picked up, there were a few other soldiers there being dropped off. I wasn't the only one in my holiday clothes dropping off my son to go into combat. Because there was no life-saving need for me to drive anywhere else after dropping him off, I stayed in the Bet Shemesh train station parking lot for a few hours until the end of the Sabbath. Bet Shemesh sits on the flight path for Israel's fighter jets when they carry out airstrikes on Gaza. For those 2+ hours, a steady stream of jets thundered across the sky, back and forth to Gaza and back. When I arrived home in the evening, my 25-year-old son, a reservist in a combat infantry unit, had been called as well. He was packing up to be picked up soon by a fellow reservist to head to his base. Later that evening, my 24-year-old daughter, a combat medic in the Home Front Command, was told to be ready. Early the next morning, her call came. I drove her to Kiryat Gat to meet her ride down to Gaza. My son-in-law, 2 of my sons, and my daughter were all now on their way into a combat zone. When I tell you this affects everyone in the entire country, I mean it. To finish his article. Exactly 50 years ago, Israel's enemies chose the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, to attack us. And now here we were, once again reminded by our enemies that this is fundamentally a spiritual war. Do these Hamas terrorists think they will destroy the state of Israel with these attacks? Do they think they will improve the lives of their population this way? Of course not. That is not their goal. When the nation of Israel left Egypt, after God had decimated the mighty Egyptian empire with the 10 plagues and then drowned their army in the Red Sea, Amalek attacked. Remember what he said to us on Sunday? Did Amalek really think that they would defeat the children of Israel? Did they not know what happened to Egypt? The answer is that they didn't care. They wanted to kill Jews, plain and simple. More to the point, Amalek and the other nations who stood in the way of the children of Israel during their journey were trying to prevent the nation of Israel from possessing the land promised to us by God. For all the geopolitical analysis we will read in the coming days, the conflict is actually quite simple. Nothing has changed since Amalek after the Exodus. The Hamas charter, which I referenced earlier, the Hamas charter calls for the murder of Jews and for the eradication of the entire Jewish state. This is not about any occupied territory or two-state solution. The enemies of Israel want to destroy us, and they seek to prevent us from building our nation in the land of Israel. If history is any guide, the coming weeks will find Israel increasingly criticized and pressured by governments and media around the world. It is a moment of truth for our leaders. May God grant them the courage to see this fight through to the end. But it is also a moment of truth for people of faith, all people of faith. Those who would seek to prevent the Jewish people from living in the land of Israel stand opposed to God's promises and plan for the world. To speak up for Israel at this time is to stand for the truth of God's word when it matters most. And he says at the end, please pray for my children. So, after a summary, and really I'll tell you this was the PG-rated summary, because the darkness and the evil that I could have shared with you is more than any of us can handle. The question is, what scripture can we depend on? And so, if you want to have your Bible or your phone app or just look on the screen, we're going to study Psalm 121 for just a moment. Psalm 121 is a song of a pilgrim on a journey. It's a prayer. Psalm 121 verse 1 says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? In the middle of a scary and dangerous world, how will I be protected? When you look up and you look around and you see all the evil and all the danger, all the darkness, from where shall my help come? And then we remember that every journey is made in God's world where he reigns supreme. Verse 2 says, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. The dangers are unknown, but the security is certain. See, I don't know who the attacker is, but I know who the protector is. I place my faith and trust in the all-powerful creator of heaven and earth. So back up one, please. Verse 1 says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? Verse 2 says, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Verse 3 says, he will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Do you see what just happened? We went from first person to second person. This writer was praying for himself on his journey, and now he's praying for you on your journey. God, will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. He's not going to go to sleep. He's not going to take a break. He's not going to take a day off. And see, when you go from first person to second person, that says that the Lord may even send you companions and encouragers on the journey. Because one of the reasons the journey is so scary is because I'm taking it alone. But if I have a fellow traveler with me, that brings encouragement. And it says, he who keeps you will not slumber. The God who has been your king and protector thus far will not fail you now. Verse 4, behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. And to speak personally for 1 minute, I had broadcasted a football game Friday night, and I got home Friday night, and that's when this all started. And so there's not been a lot of sleep in my life since then, because staying in touch with all of my friends and watching all of the news and all of those things. And it's dark, and it's evil, and it's tragic. And thank you, God. People keep asking, how are my friends doing? And thank you, God, my friends are all alive. But every one of my friends knows people who have lost their lives. And in the middle of all of that, I've been counting on a lot of scriptures, but one of them is, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Because God makes and keeps covenants with his people in his land. He will not be indifferent or disregard them. The Lord will be alert in protecting his own. Verse 5 says, the Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The Lord can never lose his beloved child. You will remain by his side. He's your keeper. He's your protector. He's your guard. The shade on your right hand. Those who place their trust in God have him as their constant companion. Verse 6. It's a genius verse. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. And you say, what is that about? We're talking about a journey, and a dangerous journey, and an enemy attacking me. And it says, the sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. Understand, the sun is a real threat. It can hurt you. The moon is only a perceived threat. But both feel really scary. Real threats and perceived threats. Some of the things that we are fearful of, they're real threats. They're real dangers. And sometimes, if we were non-emotional, and if we were objective, and if we were looking at this from the outside, we would think of some of our fears and go, that's not even a real fear. That's not even a real thing. But it still causes terror in our lives. So the real threats, the sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. See, our God cares about all our fears. Verse 7, the Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. And let's be honest. Those of us 6,000 miles away who are watching the news are observing evil. And all of my friends who are there, living in the middle of that hell on earth, as Ralph called it, evil is the only thing they're able to call this. I told you at the beginning tonight that there's a lot of words that just don't apply. There's a lot of words being thrown around in the media like barbaric and inhumane and inhuman and animals, cruelty, savagery. These words are being thrown around because we're trying to find words to describe the evil. And I'll tell you again, I didn't show you the worst of it. The Lord will protect you from all evil. That's hard to trust when you're surrounded by so much evil. He will keep your soul. See, the Lord cares about your physical well-being and your spiritual well-being, because please remember something. Please God, this is going to be over in a month, in 6 months. Nobody knows. Please God. Please God. But every Israeli male ages 18 to 40 is fighting a war right now. Guess what that is? And I'm going to say this over and over. You'll hear it on Sunday. I'm sure I'll say it again. That is the next generation of leadership of an entire country. And if you hear me say this on Sunday, it's because this is serious for me. Because the entire future of this country is going to be changed. Because it's not just 18 to 40-year-old males, a lot of the females as well. This is a traumatic, brain-altering experience that's going to affect an entire generation of a nation for years to come. And most of my friends are around my age. So most of my friends are not fighting. But like I have children in the U.S. Army, my friends have children in the Israeli Army. So all of the military guys in the room, you understand, it's one thing when it's us in the middle of it. It's a whole other ball game when it's our kids in the middle of it. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The soul of this country is going to be impacted for a generation. The last verse, number 8 of Psalm 121, the Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. You're going out, outside the house, go to work, go to school, go to combat. You're out. And you're coming in. Your home life. He's trustworthy as our protector in all places. And from this time forth and forevermore, he's trustworthy at all times. We just finished reading Psalm 121 in English, of course. But I want you to watch a video. It's going to be a song. Joshua Aaron's a friend of mine. He's a tremendous musician, and he's going to sing this psalm for us. It's in Hebrew, but watch for a moment.
למות רק לך
that last verse, Psalm 121, verse 8. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. I told you on Sunday that this is the time to make a choice. It's a time to make a choice. And for followers of Jesus who understand their Bible, this is the time to make a choice. And you say, isn't there evil all over the world? Yes. Isn't there evil every day, everywhere? Yes. But when you understand the covenant of God and those who want to break and cause the breaking of the covenant of God, this is personal for us. Not just for my friends, but for our faith, this is personal. I want you to watch one more video. Our good friend, our partner in ministry, Pastor Chad Holland from King of Kings Church in Jerusalem, sent us this today.
Shalom, First Melissa. Dear friends, Pastor Trey and Bretta, bless you guys. We so appreciate you staying connected with us and continuing to pray all the time for what's happening here in Israel. I'm standing right in front of this beautiful synagogue as I give you a moment of a report. Many of you have followed the news. You already know some of the statistics. Over 3,000 injured, 1,200 have lost their life, unfortunately. That includes 160 soldiers, police officers, including firefighters, and many, many dozens of children. We're in and out of the bomb shelters regularly because of the sirens and the rockets. Over 5,000 rockets have been fired. Right now we're facing warfare on 3 different fronts from 3 different countries. We have the biggest fighting right now in the south at the Gaza border, but we're also getting rocket fire and tank fire. On the ground troops are battling in the Lebanon border and now with the rockets fired from Syria. So things have escalated a little bit here. After the first day of rocket fire, Hamas shifted their focus from southern Israel and from the center of Israel, and now they've bombed heavily the west coast. All of the beaches are closed, as you can imagine. Schools are closed, businesses, not a lot's going on. Most people are trying to stay safe. We've started an Israel War Relief Fund, and yesterday we were able to feed 80 soldiers. Today we fed 20 displaced families. We've set up trauma counseling posts as well. We also were able to get funding to some of our Arab congregation members through their pastor across the border because all of the border checkpoints are closed. And as you can imagine, the supply chain has been disrupted. We've brought up 660,000 reservists in addition to our standing army. So that's a good percentage of the population is now engaged in warfare. So thank you for your continued prayers. God is an amazing God. He's protected his people. As tragic as the numbers are, we understand it could be so much worse without the hand of God. So thank you guys for your prayers. We're happy to give you any other updates that are helpful for you guys along the way. Thank you, Pastor Trey and Bretta, for giving us this moment.
So I would like us to finish tonight as we finished on Sunday, and that is praying Psalm 20, what our Israeli friends have asked us to pray. So if you will say it with me out loud. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob set you securely on high. May he send you help from the sanctuary and support you from Zion. May he remember all your meal offerings and find your burnt offering acceptable. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your counsel. We will sing for joy over your victory, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some boast in chariots and some in horses, but we will boast in the name of the Lord our God. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stood upright. Save, O Lord, may the King answer us in the day we call. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for praying. This is a long way from over. Bow with me now, please. God, I pray for my friends. I pray for the family members, sons and daughters who are fighting a war right now. I pray for people who've lost their babies, their spouses. I pray for national leaders, military leaders in Israel and in America to be wise, to be honest, to be courageous, to be bold, to make decisions that need to be made. I pray for those who would spread lies and spread false equivalencies and spread simple hatred, that you would shut their mouths. Some boast in chariots, some boast in horses, but we will boast in the name of the Lord our God. Am Yisrael Chai. And thank you that we, as the followers of Jesus, get to stand by with them and pray. And we do pray this in the name of Yeshua. Amen. Good night, everyone.